Good afternoon and welcome to the United Methodist Building. My name is John Hill and I am currently serving as the Interim General Secretary for the United Methodist Board of Church and Society. And it is my privilege and joy to welcome you to today's program as we are celebrating 100 years of social witness from this sacred place, a place set apart for the work of justice and peace. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are standing on, and this building was constructed on, the traditional lands of the Nacotchtank or Anacostan, and the Piscataway people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. We lament the ways in which we as a church have participated in the violence and displacement of indigenous peoples and commit in this space to our continued work resisting colonialism through acts of repentance, reconciliation, and justice. It was in January 1924 that this newly constructed Methodist building was dedicated as a center of worship and work and witness, facing the U.S. Capitol and a decade later, the U.S. Supreme Court. Today, in 2024, we celebrate 100 years of faithful ministry as we find ourselves at a hinge moment in history, in the history of the United Methodist Church, in the history of the United States and of our wider world. So as we kick off our anniversary celebrations today, we do so looking back, both to commemorate, but just as importantly so that we might better understand how to faithfully engage the present, how the lessons of our history, both inspiring and cautionary, might help us more faithfully contribute to the next chapter of our shared journey, equipping and strengthening us to answer God's call for justice and peace. And so it is in that spirit that I am excited to welcome you all to today's program. We are expecting, as the program indicates, that our friend and a champion of justice, the Honorable Emanuel Cleaver II, will be joining us. As we all know, the calendars of Congress do not always align with the calendars of a live stream. So when he comes, we will greet him and give him space to give remarks. So it is now that I will introduce our Senior Executive Director for Engagement and Education, Amy Hong, who will introduce our featured presenters.
Good afternoon. My name, again, is Amy Hong, and I serve as a Senior Executive Director of Education and Engagement here at Church and Society. I'm happy to be with you all today to moderate the next portion of our event. First, we'll hear from our presenter, Dr. Ashley Boggan, and then we will meet for what I think will be a very lively conversation at the round table with Reverend Dr. Sharon Austin and Mr. Sam England. I'm excited to introduce you to our presenter for today. Dr. Ashley Boggan is the General Secretary of the General Commission on Archives and History. She earned her PhD from Drew Theological School's Graduate Division of Religion and an MA in American Religious History from the University of Chicago's Divinity School. She is the author of 3 books titled Nevertheless, American Methodists and Women's Rights, Entangled, A History of American Methodism, Politics, and Sexuality, and added to the Revised American Methodism, A Compact History, which is, I believe, the most recent. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ashley, for being with us today, and we are excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Amy, for the introduction. Good afternoon. 100 years. 100 years of social witness. 100 years of Wesleyan ministry have been planned in these offices, organized in this lobby, and witnessed from these front steps. We are here today to celebrate the dedication of the United Methodist Building. But this space represents so much more than just stones and mortars. It represents the strangely warmed heart of what it means to be Wesleyan, to do good and seek justice in this world through social and political advocacy. Our founder, John Wesley, knew the potential importance of buildings as a place to gather together, to plan witness and mission. In Bristol, England, around May of 1739, John Wesley laid the cornerstone of the first Methodist building in the world. Called the New Room, his choice to build a building was a bit of a peculiar one. You see, John had just, in his own words, submitted to be more vile by preaching in the fields of Bristol to thousands of coal miners. He had just discovered that ministry isn't constrained by the walls of the church or by the walls of any building, but ministry happens, truly happens, when we take the message of God's love out into this world to live and breathe amongst people. And yet, after feeling revived in his call through field preaching, before leaving Bristol, he lays the cornerstone to the New Room. Today, I want to start this talk by connecting the history of the social witness that has happened in and around the United Methodist building with that of the New Room. For these two spaces truly are cradles of Methodist social witness in this world. Constructed almost 200 years apart, these spaces serve as a reminder of the literal, physical, and even metaphorical place that Methodism occupies. Wesley chose Bristol specifically for the first Methodist building because of its economic and political status. It was the second largest city in England and was the heart of the English Industrial Revolution. Bristol was originally a medieval town built to withstand about 5,000 people, but by the 1730s, its population had swelled to over 40,000. Because of the large amounts of industry conducted inside its walls and the prominence of coal mining outside, Bristol was widely known as the dirtiest city in all of England. And due to its being on the western seaboard, Bristol also became the main port of the African slave trade. It's estimated that between 1739 and 1748, right when Methodism was being born in Bristol, approximately 245 ships left Bristol carrying 500,000 enslaved persons. And it is here that Wesley decided to lay that literal foundation of Methodism. And he didn't choose a place on the outskirts of the city. The New Room was built in the middle of the industrial and residential chaos of Bristol. Wesley chose this space because it is where the people were. It is the space that had the most potential to make a social, economic, and political witness. The New Room was not simply a chapel, although it did serve as a preaching house. It was also a medical dispensary. It was a gathering place for societies, classes, and bands. It was a market. It was a place to protest. It was housing for preachers and those in need. It was to be a place to harness ministry that would predominantly happen outside of the walls, on the streets and in the fields. And we are here today to celebrate a building that lives into this very legacy. We are here to honor the people who have walked out of these doors to embody Methodist witness in the world. We are here to mark the rallying and the protesting that has happened on the front lawn. We are here to honor the way that God's love has been embodied by those who have planned inside and witnessed outside. To celebrate the history of this building, we cannot simply go back to 1923 or 1924. We have to look back a bit further. Credit must be given to the Methodist women of the 19th century temperance movement, who bravely stepped out of their proper spheres and into the social and political realms to relieve social sin. These women, early on, led by Frances Willard, knew that their Methodist faith would not let them sit idly by and watch the world around them suffer. These women embodied the Wesleyan ideals that your faith should compel you to make yourself uncomfortable, to push your own boundaries in order to spread the love of God to as many people as possible. In their own ways, they lived into that Wesleyan submission to be more vile by stepping out of their homes, challenging politicians and laws, and seeking to eliminate the roots of systemic problems which plagued their society. They began with protesting alcohol for naming alcohol as the root cause of social sin, brought together Methodists in the North and the South, progressive and conservative, and across denominations. But these women quickly moved on and included other major social reforms, advocating for women's right to vote, for fair labor laws, and for safe workplaces. These women first stepped out of their homes and into the public realm in order to show how a practical application of the gospel message could enact real change in the world. It is because of them and their witness that Methodists a few decades later could build this center of social witness here on Capitol Hill. And it is through their efforts that this strategic plot of land was chosen. And it was their pennies gathered together which ensured its purchase. Alongside these Methodist women, 5 Methodist men began to strategically implement social witness alongside the fabric of Methodist bureaucracy. By 1907, Frank Mason North, Harry F. Ward, Herbert Welch, Worth Tippie, and Elbert Robb Zering formed the Methodist Federation for Social Service. In its first year, they drafted a social creed, which focused largely on labor rights and can be read just outside the doorway here. This creed was quickly adopted by the 1908 General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church and soon after by the National Council of Churches. And this wasn't just a conversation about social reform happening amongst Methodists or even Protestants. Methodists conversed with the then President Teddy Roosevelt about their ideas for social reform. And 25 years later, many of the reforms called for in that original social creed were embodied in President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. In 1912, the Methodist Episcopal Church decided to more directly incorporate its social witness into its connectional structure through the establishment of the Board of Temperance, Prohibition, and Public Morals. 5 years later, Reverend Dr. Clarence True Wilson broke ground here to secure this physical space on Capitol Hill. And much like John Wesley's new room, the building constructed here lives amongst the chaos of Washington, D.C. Sitting directly across from the nation's capital, Methodists could easily and readily protest, witness, and advocate for their various social, economic, and political reforms. In 1931, an apartment building was added to the back so that it could also be a place of rest and of community. Here, congresspersons, bishops, and for those who have worked to reshape the very fabric of American society have laid their heads to rest. Time and time again, this space echoes back to the new room. Now, for the rest of this talk, I want to focus on some of the tangible reforms which have been enacted from this space and connect them back with John Wesley's 3 God. It is of church and society of the United Methodist Church today and its predecessor agencies have ensured that Methodists and United Methodists live into our Wesleyan social ideals. Before diving in, I must give credit where it is due. Dr. Jesse Smith has done a tremendous job assembling stories of witness from across the last 100 years. And many of the stories that I will use in this talk come from her book, For Justice and Enduring Peace. So first, do no harm. When Wesley writes the rules for the people called Methodists, one of the first things he called out as doing harm was slaveholding. From the pulpit of the New Room in Bristol, Wesley preached anti-slavery sermons. His anti-slavery treatise, Thoughts Upon Slavery, was most likely written from his bedroom there and first distributed on its front steps. Alongside slaveholding, he included, quote, fighting, quarreling, and brawling. And living into this call to do no harm, Methodists over the last 100 years have long stood for world peace. In 1936, the Methodist Episcopal Church first established the Commission on World Peace, which began by registering conscientious objectors. Over the course of the 1940s, Methodists differed on whether or not the United States should enter World War II. But the 1940 General Conference maintained that peace should be sought overall, and Methodist political influence and social campaigns undergirded the later Protestant support of the United Nations in 1945. From speaking out against apartheid in South Africa to protesting the Vietnam War and the war on Afghanistan, Methodists' calls for peace know no end. Our second general rule is to do good. Wesley elaborated upon this rule, beginning with care, with care for our bodies. John Wesley sought to renew the connection between body and soul. He recognized that denying one's body in order to tend to one's soul was not a healthy way to love God. Through publications such as The Primitive Physic, Wesley provided home remedies that most people could use and concoct to address various ailments. For he knew that if one was to do good in this world, if one was to truly be able to attend to the ordinances of God, their everyday bodily needs must also be met. The work of the General Board of Church and Society has long centered concerns for health, body, and wholeness. In 2010, Reverend Cynthia Abrams was serving the General Board of Church and Society as its Director of Health and Wholeness. She led United Methodist advocacy for the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And while she recognized that the bill was not perfect, she honored that it would allow for greater protections and access to health care for all persons. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, from the floor of Congress, Nancy Pelosi thanked the United Methodist Church for its support and assistance in passage. Doing good also means running with patience the race that is set before us through Christ's witness. In this effort, United Methodists today also seek to ensure civil and human rights. In the 1940s, Washington, D.C. was a segregated city. The cafeteria here at the Methodist building was integrated in 1947. And it was one of the few places on Capitol Hill where persons of any race could gather together to strategize. Methodists gathered here to march alongside Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1963 March on Washington. And from inside these walls, Methodists hosted organizational groups who planned for the 1968 and 1969 Poor People's Campaign. From here, Methodists have sought to ensure protections against police brutality, against unfair immigration laws and restrictions, and against capital punishment. And from here, we've sought to repent for our complicity in heinous crimes against indigenous nations. And finally, Wesley calls on us to love God. Over the last 100 years, the United Methodist Building has been a physical representation of our immense connection and dedication to faith-informed outward acts of God's love. True Wesleyan-based Methodist witness must meet the needs of everyday people. It must push the laws of society, of state, and even of church to recognize the physical, intellectual, and spiritual needs of those who are most outcast and most oppressed. For when we join the United Methodist community through our baptismal vows, we vow to, quote, accept the freedom and power that God gives us to resist evil and justice and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. The social witness that I've spoken of here today now resides within the mandates of the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church. And it is through this agency that United Methodists and non-United Methodists learn how to be a Wesleyan social witness in this world. Y'all, being United Methodist isn't some radical, mind-blowing, theologically dense concept. It's actually quite simple. It is faith as love acted out. And what makes this different from other faiths, what makes our why or our characteristic different, is our willingness to go beyond the individual, to go beyond the spiritual, into the social and political realms in order to spread that love. Methodists have not historically been known for their beliefs, but for their actions. In Wesley's day, they rose early, they studied scripture intently, they prayed incessantly, they fasted, they openly talked about their spirituality. They visited the sick and the imprisoned. They called out the rich and the landed elite. In other words, they lived their lives as faith, as love acted out. And we get our name, Methodists, for this lived, justice-seeking, socially upending, politically challenging method of doing religion. And just as John preached from the market cross throughout England, here from the steps of the United Methodist building, various Methodists have preached this message of God's all-encompassing love. And much like this building sticks out on Capitol Hill, in order to be a United Methodist in the world, to truly seek justice, equity, and the worthiness of all people, you're going to stick out. You're going to be known as the person who pushes the boundaries. You're going to constantly be putting people above institutions, because that is what God calls us to do. I want to conclude with a challenge for you all to recognize that history isn't in the past. History is now, and it should be living and breathing in us and through us. It should be informing which questions we ask, which resolutions we write, and which legislation we support. When future Methodists or United Methodists gather to celebrate the 200th anniversary of this building, of this United Methodist heritage landmark, what new forms of United Methodist witness will they honor? Let us start to write that story now as we continue to honor those who have passed through the doors of this building, have testified from its front steps, have marched in front of its streets. Let us go out from this place in the love of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. And as Ashley catches her breath and as we prepare for the roundtable conversation, I wanted to invite up the Honorable Emanuel Cleaver II. He is a friend of church and society, a powerful voice for justice in the U.S. Congress, and a champion of many of the priorities that Ashley lifted up. He's currently serving his 10th term, representing the 5th District of Missouri. So please join me in welcoming Honorable Emanuel Cleaver II.
I would apologize for being late, but it would disrupt your view of Congress if I had been on time. So thank you very much. I would like to welcome you. And the reason that I'm late, this is called a fly-in day, where members fly in time to vote at 6:30 tonight. So there are not many of us here. That's why things are so much calmer out on the streets. So I apologize for that as well. It was good to see Susan here. This is an interesting moment, I think, for the country, but for us, for sure. One of the things I really appreciate and enjoy is the little signs that we, and I, Mississippi, and so we take some abuse from people whom God loves, as they, try to say that we are going to hell. That our church is, which brings me to say very quickly that we are at a crossroads, and perhaps we more than most may be called upon to deal with it. And that is, in my lifetime, and certainly when I add on my 12 years as mayor in Kansas City plus 20 years here, is the first time I have felt this way. But we are on the verge of seeing a movement of Christian nationalism, and it is frightening that we are in this spot right now. And it may be important to keep in mind that the founders never put the word God in the Constitution, not one time, not once. Now, I think Jefferson, Jefferson was the main opponent. He wanted to make sure that we did not duplicate what they left in England. And so now we're having a push, and people will declare on the floor of the House of Representatives that this is a Christian nation. And so I like enthusiasm. I don't like fanaticism. And I think that's kind of where we're going. I'll end by just saying the Speaker of the House declared on the floor that if you want to know what his policies are, read the Bible. I actually have read it. And I think it's in conflict with a lot of things that go on across that street. But I don't try to convert people to Methodism. I try to do my job. I am informed by my faith. And I think this operation that we have here is great, 2 blocks from Frederick Douglass's house. And it just adds to, I think, what we stand for as United Methodists. So I appreciate what you're doing. I've lived here for 18 years and will continue to live here. It's a fabulous place. I can walk across the street and go to work and get depressed and then come back in the evenings very quickly. So God bless you and thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Cleaver, for your reflections. And as we continue on with our program, just want to also say thank you so much for Dr. Ashley for the presentation. And I know that we, sitting at this round table, are very excited to have a conversation. But before we do, I want to introduce you to the guests that are sitting at this table with me. First, I want to introduce Reverend Dr. Sharon Austin. She serves as the Director of Connectional and Justice Ministries for the Florida Conference and is an Executive Officer of Church and Society's Board of Directors. In 1981, Reverend Dr. Sharon made history as the first woman ordained in the 95-year history of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, which we know is the home of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. In 1984, she became the first woman to serve on the pastoral staff of that church. I'm also excited to introduce you all to Mr. Sam England, who is a lay member of the Houston Annual Conference, who has served Holston's Southeastern Jurisdictional Conference delegation since 2015, and the Board of Directors for Church and Society since 2016. Mr. Sam is a licensed attorney and is currently pursuing a PhD in political science at Emory University, focusing on judicial decision-making in the U.S. appellate courts, including the Supreme Court, which is right across the street. So thank you both so much for being here. As we begin, I was wondering, Reverend Dr. Sharon, can you start with your kind of response and reflection to Ashley's presentation?
Yes, thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful, Ashley. Thank you so much for just the richness of what you shared with us. And I'm honored to participate in the celebration, maybe especially so as the celebration occurs during Black History Month. The beginning of your presentation reminded me of a book I purchased maybe a year ago entitled Slavery in Bristol. G.M. Best's book chronicles the experience, firsthand account of a Nigerian young person who was able to actually speak into his own horrific experience with slavery. And yet our church's tragic history regarding slavery and its ongoing struggle with racism still leads us to the point where we're able to celebrate 100 years of justice in this building. And this anniversary, of course, today taking place during Black History Month. And so I think we need to look for signs of hope and the realization that we are far from having arrived. About 20 years ago, I had an opportunity to visit the New Room in Bristol, England. And at the time, I had not visited our United Methodist building. I had a chance to stand in the courtyard where one can see the horseback statue of John Wesley and the preaching statue of Charles Wesley. And at the time, I didn't envision the connection between that experience and a building I had not visited. They are connected, and now I, as well as many of you, are connected to both, and I just think that's another wonderful expression of our connectional church. Last year, Bishop Tom Berlin, our new bishop in the Florida Conference, hosted David Worthington, who was the then director of global relationships, and he visited us and spent time with us at our conference. We had one of these lunch and learns, and I never will forget that the conclusion of his words challenged us to learn more about our Wesleyan roots, our Methodist history in the United States. And so somehow I feel that today is a wonderful culmination of the challenge David extended to us at that time. And so there are two thoughts that occur to me. One, the importance of buildings and other monuments, the way in which they often both follow our passions, but sometimes also incite our passions. The United Methodist building was erected during the era of Jim Crow. And according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, it was during a period in time when most of the monuments erected to glorify the Civil War were also erected. And so it's kind of interesting to remember that most of the states that actually built these monuments were not only the states that attempted to secede the Union, but a vast number in addition to that. As women raised many of the funds that were used to erect this building, women also raised much of the funding to erect those monuments. And I think that says a couple of things about women. I think the fundraising efforts of women then and now are legendary. And I think we need to acknowledge that even when we may differ with the way those funds have been used. In 2022, I attended the unveiling of the statue of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Her statue joins that of Frances Willard in Statuary Hall. I want to note it took over 100 years for the statue of Dr. Bethune to join the statue of Frances Willard. Now, Frances Willard did not live long enough to appreciate the creation of the social creed, but we take pride in both these women whose lives served the mission of the church and whose witness led to the creeds, the charters that we now celebrate today, and which eventually gave way to the social principles, the ones we have currently and the ones that will go before the General Conference, the revised social principles. And so I just feel a sense of real pride in being a woman, of being a woman of color, and appreciating the trajectory of the leadership of women through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, from the social creeds to the social principles, and they have been a gift to our church. Their work, Willard, Bethune-Cookman, and others, really have laid the path that so many of us have followed. And so we've been on a mission, and I think, Ashley, you call us today to continue with that good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sam, your response.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It really is remarkable to be up here. I feel like not only because of the studio lights, but because of these other folks, I need some sunglasses at this table. I'd like to make 3, hopefully brief points in response, and then we can dive into conversation. First, it's been mentioned several times, our next door neighbors have been invoked, and so since that's who I study, I'd like to just spend a moment on that. I really liked the situating that everyone has done today, but Ashley included, that this is a building not just across the street from Congress, but on Capitol Hill more broadly. Yeah. And so we know from the social science, particularly the political science literature, that it's sort of tough to get to the Supreme Court about advocacy issues, right? They take a very small set of cases, but we also know that they, because they are less connected with the public, they take their cue from Congress. Congress informs them, sends signals about what the public thinks. And so in an era in which many of the issues that this institution cares about and is charged with advocating for, right? Poverty, peace, healthcare, immigration, climate change, racial justice, human and civil rights become increasingly popular on the court's docket. This building's location, not only next door, so that the justices can see the signs as they drive in, well, as they're driven in, but also so they can hear the rallies, but most importantly, so that we can be close to Congress, and Congress can then send signals to the court. And so, lest we think that being close to Congress doesn't help us with the court, hopefully I've dispelled that now. Second point, it was mentioned several times today about the importance of being outside to Wesley. And I think that's, obviously this is a Methodist building. That's exactly, we should be talking about our guy. But I think it's also really important to make a point about ecumenicalism. And so to Jesus, right, outdoors was really important. Sometimes when confined inside, right, people still got in, right, through the ceiling, however. And so more broadly, ecumenically, I think outside is really important. And also interfaith, right? That's not where my scholarship is, so I won't delve too deeply into that, but it's important in other faiths as well. And so if we're going to accomplish the things that we would like to accomplish to lessen suffering in our time and set up the folks after us to lessen suffering in theirs, then it's going to be really important that we spend time outside and cultivate an ecumenical and interfaith persons with no faith partnerships so we can get the job done. Lastly, I want to sort of amplify the call at the end of the talk, which I found really powerful, by doing another sort of calendar move. This one more about the liturgical calendar, though. And so I think it's just absolutely remarkable that this event is happening today, sandwiched between Transfiguration Sunday on the one hand and between Ash Wednesday on the other. Because what is this building if not the mountain we go to see Elijah and Moses and then leave?
Amen.
Right? We spend so much time talking about open doors in this denomination, and yes, rightfully so. It's so that folks can come in. Anyone, right? Anyone. I'm not contradicting that now. But opening doors have a second purpose. So we can go out. And so this is a fantastic event, and the work done in this building is absolutely crucial to our time and the time after us. But if tomorrow, when we hear those sacred words during the imposition of ashes, from dust you came, and to dust you shall return, we don't use that as a call to go be love in action, faith in action, to pick up the legacy that folks have left for us who have already turned to dust, and to set up the future for the folks who have not yet come from dust. If we don't use our fleeting but important moment as we ought to, well, then I'm not sure the purpose of having the building. So those are my thoughts. And again, Ashley, just excellent work.
Thank you.
Wow. I feel like that should wrap everything up. But we do have time for a conversation, and I'm really glad that we have this time to do so. Well, thank you so much for both of your responses. And Ashley, do you have any responses to what they shared and their comments to your presentation?
I mean, I think that one of the interesting kind of paradoxes, I guess, is the word I'll use, with Methodism is that we are kind of a people who do such great work outside of the walls of a building. And yet, we are also a people who take great pride in the physical construction of some of the spaces that we hold claim to. And so honoring and acknowledging that tension is so important. And I'm glad that both of y'all picked up on that and elaborated upon that in your own ways. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, in hearing some of what you have all been sharing, especially thinking about what you shared about how the history is not the past, but it is also now, in the way that you have all been sharing that as well. What are some examples that you see that happening here in this building as to what happened in the past, what's happening now, where you hope that perhaps in 200 years, people look back and celebrating the 200th, what they'll look back and say about the 100th to the 200th years?
One thing that occurs to me is the celebration and the opportunity that Florida really took advantage of with the invitations for young clergy to come and to be a part of the exposure, the training, learning about the agency's ministry. So not the agency, but the ministry of the agency. And I have an opportunity through my work at the conference and serving as a district superintendent now for the third time to really appreciate the leadership of young clergy who have had this as a part of their early experience and how they really have honed and refined their justice conversations, their preaching, their teaching. They embody it as opposed to something that they may have learned later and have to be reminded of. And I was just very grateful that the conference had an opportunity to contribute to the endowment named for our beloved former General Secretary Susan Henry-Crowe, who is here today, because it's our opportunity to invest in the continuation of what we say we value now for future generations.
Thank you.
I think I would say that I am concerned about what we might accomplish in the next 100 years. I know I talked a lot about the importance of outside the building, but the only way this can be our sort of, transfiguration mountain is that when we come here, there are folks equipped to equip us. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that the denomination is shifting priorities in lots of ways, but one really important way is that the denomination has lost focus on how to equip folks in central locations who, folks can come from all over the world to come and get lessons here. And if the denomination isn't going to continue supporting the folks who staff these agencies in sort of the same robust manner as earlier in the 20th century, then I have a real concern about what there will be to celebrate in 100 years. I know that decisions have yet to be made, and so I would hope that the next century is on the forefront of folks' minds as those decisions are made, so that there will be people here celebrating things that are beyond what we can imagine here today.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's such a great point, Sam, because this building is, and the work that happens here is a great example of what it means to be connectional, right? Apportionment dollars are gathered together and then they are distributed to support the ministries of justice and equity that are put out. And as, budgets shift and as conversations shift, we need to remember that if we are going to remain connectional, supporting the work of the general agencies, particularly the General Board of Church and Society, is one of those spaces and places through which our connectional nature is known to the world, and through which people see that, oh, a United Methodist did that, right? Like, historically, when you look at some of the social reforms that we've been behind, Methodists were more prominently known for being behind them. That's because our connectional nature was stronger. And when we decrease funding or we decrease support of those connectional agencies, our witness doesn't decrease, but the name associated with that witness, kind of, or that automatic association, I think, is affected.
I think both of you are also reminding us of the importance of our identity, and it is as important, if not more, for laity than clergy. Our recent experience with disaffiliations reminds us of the need to do that work, to do it all the time, and to do it throughout our churches and our communities. I always say, we have many more lay folks than we do clergy, and so if we don't invest in the laity, we really have lost our way.
Yeah.
I feel like we just kind of tapped the potential for this conversation to go further, and I'm realizing we're at time for this roundtable. But before we close the roundtable, I would like to just kind of hear closing remarks from you all, your hopes and dreams looking forward to the next 100 years of church and society and this building. So why don't we start, we'll go this way, Ashley, Sharon, and Sam.
Okay. I think I'll close with, I don't remember if Frances Willard, if she wrote this in a speech or if it was in one of her journals, but she said, "God is action, let us be like God." So how can we embody that? How can we be like God? By being in action, by being a people who move throughout the society around us in faith as acted out as love. So God is action, let us be like God.
Mm-hmm. There is a political idiom that is frequently used, and it is the reference to show horse versus workhorse. John Wesley was a workhorse, pun intended. And if we are going to be faithful to our tradition, we are called to be workhorses and not show horses for the mission of the church and for the kingdom of God. And so I want to just close by adding this verse from 1 John 3:2 from the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. "Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed. What we do know is this: when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is." Now and in the future, God is calling us to this work. And so we are children of God now, children of love, children of advocacy, children of justice. And our future has not yet been revealed, but it's calling us now to live into it.
Sharon. Yeah, I think I would just say that it's difficult to forecast, despite the forecasting I've already done. And when I find it difficult to know what to do 10 steps from now, doing the next right thing seems to be the best bet. Mm-hmm. So tomorrow, when I hear those words, I'm going to give up, or at least try to, caring only about which paragraph gets edited in which way in the Book of Discipline. And I'm going to try to take on lessening suffering in our time. And this place is a perfect place for those who want to take up that mantle.
Amen.
Thank you all so much for being part of this roundtable discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jessie Smith. I serve on staff here at GBCS and am the author and curator of For Justice and Enduring Peace, 100 Years of Social Witness. I want to first acknowledge the editors, designers, and publishers from the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry and Abingdon Press for making this book possible. A deep thanks to the General Commission on Archives and History for the wonderful hospitality and support that was provided for the research done. Deep gratitude for the GBCS team for their support as well. And thank you all for being here, whether in person or online, to celebrate our history together. For Justice and Enduring Peace is a collection of writings selected from past articles written by staff or program participants and date back from as early as 1924 all the way up to 2021. The collection of writings is arranged in 4 themes, and Dr. Ashley alluded to this: health and wholeness, civil and human rights, peace, and ecology and economy. Each theme reflects areas of work that have carried across the decades in this building and across the connection. Some discussion questions can be found in the back as prompts for further reflection. Each thematic chapter contains a montage of voices from luminaries like Reverend Joseph Lowry and Bishop Leontine Kelly, to those more unknown, like a pseudonymous migrant woman, America Sosa, telling her story of taking sanctuary in the 1980s. Other voices include the 1957 condemnation of apartheid in South Africa from one of our predecessor bodies, the Board of World Peace, as well as a call for ecological and environmental justice in the Philippines, penned by Mervyn Toquero and Levi Bautista in 2000. This book is intended to be a collection of writings showcasing the voices of brave people of faith who walked this path of social holiness in critical moments. Reading these pieces, you may find yourself wondering if we have really come as far as we would like, or do we struggle with the same issues over and over? But in working on this collection, I found what we select from in the past can be the thing that gives voice to our own struggle. We see ourselves in the past, but the past is not the same as us today. It is the theological paradox that we as Christians rejoice, knowing that God declares, "See, I am doing a new thing." And at the same time, the only way we know that God declares this is because we have carried forth stories of the past in sacred scripture. We need the things of the past to remind us that things are indeed made new. I pray this text honors those who have gone before us, and by hearing their stories, gives those who read it new motivation for action today and for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse, and what an incredible gift your book is for us as we look back on our last 100 years and imagine our next 100 years together. And what a gift of all of the presenters. I'm just so grateful for the conversations and the thoughts that they sparked in my mind, and I know in many of those that were listening today, and conversations that will inform how we continue our work going forward. What a great way to kick off our anniversary celebration. To close our program, I wanted to invite up to the podium our immediate past General Secretary, the Reverend Dr. Susan Henry-Crowe, who will provide us, she wrote the epilogue to Jesse's book For Justice and Enduring Peace, and is going to provide us some closing comments and a sending forth.
It really is such an honor to be here today and to share in this time. I want to thank John most especially for continuing to guide the work of this agency, as well as the former general secretaries, the present board, the former board, and especially Ashley, Amy, Sharon, Sam, and Jesse today in making this really a wonderful celebration. So thank you all. I do want to take just a personal word to thank Sarah Ann Corbett for being here. She probably has the longest history with us. Her husband, Jack Corbett, was on the staff for many years, and there are 2 of his articles, one on new immigration and from 1973, and on handguns from 1965. So, Ms. Corbett, it's wonderful to have you as a friend and to have you here today. Antonio, in Shakespeare's The Tempest, actually says, "Whereof what's past is prologue. What to come is yours, and my discharge. With this in mind, we now come to celebrate a century of witness on behalf of the Methodist and the Evangelical United Brethren churches in the United States of America. As we sit in this seat of government on Capitol Hill, on this hill, the 1923 vision and intent for the building was for there to be a Methodist presence and faith witness in the heart of the government, serving as a beacon, a conscience, and a vision of our better angels. I write the epilogue/prologue. When the world is shattering and many countries are becoming more authoritarian and nationalistic. It is not unlike the early 20th century in the United States and the territories, this republic, and the democratic processes are more fragile and frayed than in prior decades. Evidence for this can be seen in the fact that in the 2022 midterm election cycle was held for the first time in 50 years without protection of the right to vote for minority voters. The Supreme Court had rescinded the rights of women to act in their best interest of themselves, their bodies, and their families, and gun violence is more pervasive than it even was in 1965. Russia was invading and occupying parts of Ukraine, and I had written this before October the 7th, in which there is a war between Israel and Hamas. Atrocities and horrors of war abound around the globe. And there are moments for splintering of the community and the churches. We found, as Jesse worked on the review of all the documents and all the magazines and materials here, in the publications of the Board of Church and Society and the predecessor bodies, which demonstrates hauntingly parallel injustices with our current era. What's past is prologue. It's not about history, but rather an invitation of what to come in your and my discharge. What is the future we will not only envision, but help fashion? The witness is not linear. It is a journey for justice. In this era, it begins by grappling with broken societal ills that are addressed by never completed or perfected, but we continue the journey. It is a journey of walking alongside the most vulnerable and the invisible, who are often overlooked and cannot speak for themselves, children living in poverty, communities that are hidden, young people living with mental health disease, and so on. This 100-year journey is not epilogue, but it is prologue that belongs to our discharge. We are not bound by our past, but set free to clear a path to walk into a more just and peaceful future. Because of God's vision for an inclusive and clean and free and healthy and abundantly resourced world, we are released from sin and death and doubt and fear. Our discharge is into a still broken world on a journey of hope, of life, of love, and of resurrection. Thanks be to God.